Hi, it's Carly here again to talk about my Spirited, 100-mile run to save a life. So in the series, I read a little bit about the 100-miler to give you just a taste of the race. But you also need to know that the man I was married to, the father of my 6 children, David Hardy, to run the 100-mile race in September of 1994. He was 42 years old, and we married since 1974. So we'd been married for 20 years, actually 75. So just 19 years. And our youngest child, Zachary, was 3. Our oldest, Megan, was 18 and on her way to start college at Brigham Young University. And then the other 4 were sprinkled in between. Aaron at 15, 13, James, we'll put 11 and 9 in there for David Jr. and James. So those were the children that I was mothering. And I knew that David's father had died when he was 42 years old. He had died suddenly while water skiing on a family vacation. They were living in Washington, D.C. at the time. He was vice president of CBS television and just had been working for 6 months. They came out to visit his mother's family in Ogden, Utah. A heart attack. David was only 4 years old. So the man I was married to, his father had died at 42 suddenly of a heart attack when he was just 4 years old, leaving his mother a widow with 5 children. So David and I went out in June. He was determined to run the 100. It was a part of his identity. And he loved really parenting our kids. He was such a great dad. And often would come home from work and put on an apron and bathe the children and bounce them on the bed. I'd lost my own father when I was 20. I couldn't imagine being a widow and trying to raise that brood, that hardy bunch, all by myself. So take you back to June when we were out on a training run and he was determined to run the 100. Yeah, he loved King Arthur, and this was kind of his Knights of the Round Table thing. It was also his release. He was a busy attorney, a lawyer, and this was a release for him to get out on the trails, connect with nature. And on this training run, it was actually in Brighton, Utah, where we have a family cabin. We started up a steep incline, and he turned to me and said, "This is weird. This is weird. I can't get a deep breath. There's a tight constriction around my chest." I was horrified. He thought it was weird, but I thought, oh no, this is the very thing I have always feared. The very thing. This is angina. This is a constriction around his heart. David had been diagnosed with the same heart disease as a child. It's familial hypercholesterolemia, so it is a genetic heart disease. And he had a very high cholesterol count. I don't know if you know much about cholesterol counts, but when they get up over 200, your doc is worried. His often 500. When he left on his Mormon mission at 19, it was almost 700. So a very alarmingly high cholesterol count, which is a part of the disease of FH. So I was faced with that. And then there was another scenario going on of his older sister, Claire, was in the hospital expecting a heart transplant. Awaiting a heart transplant. So these 2 things were squeezing on me. I had to get to work and figure out how I could keep David alive and still give him his wish of being involved in the Wasatch 100. I knew one of the only ways to do that was to call on our partnership. We had always been a great team and devoted to one another. So I just knew if I could make him my partner, if he could crew for me while I ran the Wasatch 100, that might be the only thing that would work to prevent him from running and having a heart attack as he ran. So that's the setup. That's the setup that I knew him well enough to say, if I'd ever said to him, you cannot run, if I'd presented an ultimatum, he would have gotten his defenses up. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to find a way for the two of us to work together. I wanted to come in the back door, if you will, and say, hey, how about if I run the Wasatch this year and you crew me? It was a hard and scary thing for me to do. Yeah, it was like, oh, I wasn't sure what would happen. Sometimes I thought, well, being crippled, if you get crippled running a 100-mile race, that's not a nice word, sorry. If something happened to me that I ended up disabled, sorry that I wasn't PC there, forgive me. That would be better than being left a widow. Anything to not be left a widow. So thank you for tuning in. I'll give you more details on that summer and that conversation in the kitchen, but I knew David well enough to know that perhaps the only angle that would work is if I jumped in to run the 100-miler and he crewed me. I had only run 2 marathons, each at 25 miles. So this was a big stretch for me. And his doctor, when he was consulting with his older sister, Claire, said, you're playing a game of Russian roulette, David. It could be 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. We don't know when, but we only know after I've looked at 2 of your siblings that the stakes are pretty high that you will have a heart attack. So he suggested open heart surgery. Dr. Donald Doty at LDS Hospital, who'd worked on his older brother Ralph and was performing the heart surgery on Claire, suggested that David go in for open heart surgery. So I thought it was a fair trade. I'll run the 100 if you'll go in for open heart surgery the day after the race ends. Thanks so much for being with me to get background, and forgive me for not being PC. I may have to re-record this. Bye-bye.